Hello, and welcome to Rule of Carnage, a series of bespoke conversations by two game designers on the nature and philosophy and experience of designing miniatures games, their betterment, presented in a way that is approachable by layman and expert alike, with a series of connected conversations, chapters, if you will, that people can refer back through, dip into and out of, and get inspiration, as well as hopefully a welcoming voice to the world of miniatures game design.
Or two chums chatting about games design, stumbling hand in hand towards a little bit more expertise, and you can watch and join and maybe learn with us.
Those would be sort of some hastily put together attempts at pitches for the Rule of Carnage YouTube channel and series of podcasts that you're currently watching, listening to, accessing in some way, shape, or form. And the reason for doing the intro in such a clunky and roundabout fashion is that Mike and I have recently been to Salute, one of the big tabletop miniatures gaming convention in the UK.
Oh man, there's a whole separate topic about why that is the format and delivery of the UK's biggest miniature games convention. Where's our ones where we get to have fun together as friends? But anyway, separate topic.
Well, yes, and and if there are some, what would we like? What would we be doing for? I mean, there is some sort of retreats, gaming retreats and things, but they tend to
Yeah.
be more.
But anyway, Salute is like an aircraft hangar stuffed with trading stalls.
Yes,
And
yes,
so it's like a market stall. It's like it's like a medieval market. And so you have to shout fresh fish very loudly if you want to be heard.
yes. If you're not aware of what Salute looks like, watch last week's video, which is me bombing around Salute with a camera, pointing at people and shouting things. And you can hear on that video quite how loud it is, and that was before the crowds were allowed in. That was like,
Yeah, it was before the punters. Yeah.
yeah, that's just the people setting up stalls and the men with bagpipes and such like. Um, and so as part of running demos and running a stall at Salute, Mike and I were both pitching various games to passers-by, people who, in some cases, had never heard of any of our stuff, or were curious about one or another one, or just curious about the artwork, the look of the game, etc., etc. So, we've recently had an intense day of sort of crash course of how to pitch games to total strangers
Yeah.
in a way to get them to stop and look at it and consider playing it and possibly buy it or whatever else. And we've been thinking that that's an important skill, because that way of pitching it is also how you're going to end up possibly presenting it to a publisher if that's the route you go, or it's going to form some part of the tagline picture for when you go to Kickstarter. Whatever you end up doing with your game, even if you're just playing it with mates at home, you're at some point going to need to pitch it to somebody,
Hmm.
even if it's just to get your buddy to sit down for like an hour and play this thing you've created. So we thought sort of having a conversation about that would be a worthwhile thing. Super, I guess, apposite because Mike, you were doing space Gits
Mm,
over Salute, and obviously, I think anybody watching the channel is going to know you're in the middle of the Space Gits Kickstarter.
right.
Um, so refining the pitch for what Space Gits is, I guess, has been like uppermost in your mind over the last few weeks.
Yeah, and I think like I'm only just now connecting together two things, which is that like so at Salute, when someone walks past and they're not really intending to stop at your stall, but they're just sort of peering over and they're just seeing, okay, what have you got here? Is this just some books? Is this RPGs or miniatures? What's going on here? I would shout at them, look them in the eye, and I would shout, dexterity based miniatures game. And that would quite often work. as like a stopping line, and they would stop and they would go. And sometimes they would go, all right, tell me what that means. And that actually, I think, is psychologically quite similar to like making a good YouTube thumbnail or making a good Kickstarter thumbnail image. In that, like, for Space Gits or any game that we are pitching, we need something attention grabbing, and that can be in like a powerful visual image. Which in the case of Salute, like there might be a banner behind me with a really cool image, which worked a lot for Hobgoblin. It had like a gnarly black metal logo, and people were like, what even is the name of this game? Like, and that was actually a stopper. So that stopper, that like attention grabber, that like intrigue creator, I think might be kind of important as a first stop, but it's not the pitch, because then comes the opportunity to pitch. And in the case of a YouTube video, it's the title of the video, or in the case of my Space Gits Kickstarter, it's the like next line of description that you can see inside the Kickstarter thing that says, from the designer of Gaslands, a dexterity-based skirmish miniature game, blah blah blah. And so we had to, like, having ensnared a potential mark, I then had to like unpack a pitch. I've not got very long. I feel like you've got, tops 10 seconds before they're going to walk or want to know more. And actually, throughout the day, having captured people with, it's a dexterity based skirmish game, and that would maybe draw people over to the table. I tried a few first mechanics to introduce because I wasn't sure for Space Gits what the pitch should start with.
Mm.
And because I'd opened with the dexterity thing, I could have gone with the dice rolling and this is how you move, because that's completely new and novel. But actually, what happened was I ended up going with the dice tower mechanic because that was like the most obvious and tactile and visual thing. And they were like, all right, tell me how that works. And I was like, well, every time you activate an orc, they take a swig and you have to put a dice. And then you put another dice. And if they take wounds, then you have to put dice. And so I encapsulated all this like, oh, activations and wounds are a single system. And the system is like Jenga. And like people could really viscerally see. And I hadn't even explained how like movement or shooting works. And I could slip a joke in straight away that would be like, every time a orc activates, they take a swig. And in the advanced game, so do you. And, that would get a laugh from the right crowd. And so the pitch ended up, I kind of swapped things around in terms of what I was pitching first, and I found that was the best order to do things. Pitch that it's a dexterity, then deliver on that with a little bit of the dice tower mechanic. And now they're thinking, wow, I've never seen a game anything like this. And then I would tell them about, well, to move, you roll the dice into the play area and move directly towards the dice. And they're like, I've never seen anything like this. And so like it became this really nice, like I'd found the escalation of the pitch where, I didn't need to pitch things like, oh, this is miniature agnostic, you can bring your own models. Like that wasn't important to the pitch. It's a
Mm.
feature of the game, but it wasn't anywhere near my like first 10 or even 30 seconds. That's later on when people are like, oh yeah, no, so I'm really interested in this. Like, what kind of models do you need? Oh, well, we're selling them as part of the Kickstarter, but you could use anything else. But like I didn't put that at the beginning of my pitch. Yeah, so how did your evolution of Pukeapocalypse go? Because you were out on the demo table, so you had visuals right in front of you as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the visuals of Pukeapocalypse are a big help,
Mm.
sort of attracting people
I
to.
think the vomit is the that's the stopping power. Like that's the what this is luminous vomit. I need to know a little bit more about this before.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's handy for the way into pitching Pukeapocalypse is that the mechanical center of the game is the laying of the puke taker tokens onto the tabletop,
Yep.
both sort of like physically and theoretically. That's like both the strategic center of the game. It's mechanically what's unusual about it, and it's sort of the attractive thing to sort of do.
Yes.
And what's particularly handy is having the illustrated puke tokens that Lucas the artist did, where they've got like eyeballs and fish guts and stuff like in, and you can physically lay it across the table and it looks like a little stream with like a puddle at one end. Gives is a way of like connecting the artwork that's in the book through to the visual experience of the game for people.
Right.
um so for that, I think like a good.
That's actually really uncommon in miniature games to have the extension of the rule book, literally vomit itself out of the rule book and onto the page, onto the
Yeah,
table. That's actually quite unusual.
Yeah, no, the fact that Exalted, wanted to do those tokens as physical punch outs, rather than, obviously, like my very, very first sort of draft of the game was like grab a whole bunch of like spare
Basic.
bases for
Yeah.
miniatures. That's why the tokens are like roughly 30 mil.
Yeah.
And it definitely, I think, a beneficial thing for Exalted to do the game and print it with a manufacturer who could do the punch out tokens.
Come on. So what's the next line? They've seen the vomit. What do you hit them with?
So Pukeapocalypse very much it's sort of referencing Tromaville movies and Garbage Pail Kids
Okay,
and
so you hit them straight away with the nostalgia.
the nostalgia and the references,
Right.
and obviously, depending on the age of the person, because of course Troma's come back round again with the new Toxic Avenger, but
Right.
lots of people saying, yeah, Toxic Avenger, and then it's talking about the kit bashing, because that's like quite central to it, and talking
Mm,
about the fact that the game wants you to have this sort of hobby loop of going back and playing and then kit bashing and then playing and then kit bashing, for catching people who, again, it's sort of placing people a little bit where they are on their sort of journey through the hobby from the GW funnel
right.
and through. And sort of particularly a good deal of people who come to our stall, and I think the stall of an indie minis game producer, are starting to open up to that idea that you don't buy a pre-boxed product and put it
Sure.
together the way the instructions say.
Yeah.
And so sort of, people saying, so what minis line is this? And me saying, well, this one is like the top half is a copper and the bottom half is a hooker, and I glued them together and painted them with Sharpie pens and fluorescent craft store paints. It is part of the thing of like saying, okay, this is a punk experience. This is about
Mm.
knocking things together and jamming them up, and having a quite sort of anarchic time of it.
So last year at UK Games Expo, you had a line that you opened each pitch with, and I couldn't hear this time round whether you were using this line. So you opened each pitch with, "This is a low minis count um, miniature agnostic skirmish game." I think that was the phrase that you used, but certainly low minis count skirmish game. And I thought that was like burying the lead quite a lot. I'm going to go ahead and just say that I thought that was quite a weak opening to your pitch. I'm interested if you've iterated past that, or whether those are still like, because it was a very like it's a very functional categorization of like, okay, before I tell you anything else, let me just tell you where in the board game aisle this sits.
Yeah,
Because I
yeah,
think that when you're pitching board games, that's pretty much essential. You're like, okay, this is a lightweight Euro, or this is like, you have to catch these, as a social deduction game. Okay, now tell me what it is, because until
yeah. And I think
you can't tell me that you can't sell me the fantasy without telling me what the format is, and I'm not sure that's true for miniature games. I might be
yeah,
wrong.
no, I think part of that was because at UKGE, I didn't have Puke Apocalypse to actually physically sell. I had a book to like for
Oh
people to look
yeah,
at
and
if someone
also
get.
it's mostly board game people anyway, so you have
And
to you have to start with the category.
yeah, so basically, because most of the people, a lot of the people at UKG are board game people, and they're looking at Puke Apocalypse, and I can see them not knowing whether it's an RPG or a board game or a minis game.
Or an art book, or what
Um,
even is this object? Yeah.
yeah, or whatever it is, and also partly because the way the stall was laid out at UKG, there was sort of, I've got card games and sort of board games on one half of the stall, and then we had like your mini stuff on the other half of the stall. But because I was stood on one side of the stall, I had like the Puke Apocalypse book on the card games half, and
So
so
you think the demo board just solved all of that, and it's like, okay,
well,
we can
being
see what it is. Tell me what it is.
yeah, having the demo board there, I think does a huge part of that heavy lifting. Being
Yeah,
absolute, I think it does the other half of it.
yeah.
And also like because I was taking a slower route into introing it to people at UKG, and I didn't have like the whole thing there. now very much the pitch opens with, this is my love letter to Tromaville movies. That
Got it.
tends to
Yeah.
be the first, that's generally the first line, because people are looking at the visuals of the game and are attracted by those sort of extreme visuals.
Right. And so then you're like, okay, if you can buy into that opening concept, then I'll explain how I'm going to deliver on that. But like
Yeah,
that's my opening like
yeah,
box
well,
into which your fantasies will be poured.
yeah, the front cover of Pukeapocalypse, it has three separate people vomiting on it, two of which are vomiting at each other.
Yeah.
And
It's
my
absolutely
assumption
repulsive.
is that somebody who stops and looks at that will be open to the idea that, Toxic Avengers and,
Yeah.
the list of that sort of gross out humor is something worth recreating, and they will find the recreation of it attractive and joyful. It's like it's part of the pitch for Gaslands is always, for me, a reference to Mad Max and Death Race 2000,
Yeah.
because that's like that's a condensed version of, this is the world we're trying to make. Are you excited about that? I don't necessarily need to further talk about that world. I can talk about other things about the game that might attract you, the miniatures
Mm.
aspect. Because with Gaslands, it's always, this is a Mad Max Death Race 2000 style racing game that you play with Hot Wheels miniatures. So it's a minis game that you've already got the minis for anyway.
Yeah.
And so it's like that's the second stage.
Yes, you've got the fantasy, you've got the how the hobby works and how like the core hook is, and then you've got the sort of the other part of it, which is like, oh, it's the cheapest miniatures game you'll ever play, sort of all buried in that opening pitch.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's true. Actually, I'd forgotten that because it was written on the poster that I was stood right next to. That people would go, "Ooh, drunk ass orcs," and I'd say, "Yeah, it's a dexterity miniatures based miniatures game about drunk ass space orcs rioting across the city," and that like isn't necessarily something that they've played a miniatures game before of, but like they can assemble those concepts in their head to form something that sounds like it's going to be silly.
Yeah, and I think again, like I think Gaslands has a very pure pitch to it. I think Space Gits has a very pure pitch to it. I think that Pukeapocalypse has like a, because it is more skirmish gamey in a way than either of those games. The pitch is a little bit looser and more reliant on the visuals. I've never gotten the pitch of A Billion Suns down
No, 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 me
satisfyingly,
neither. Me neither.
like ever. Hobgoblin, I think, is an interesting one because it for me it's always brutally fast fantasy mass battles,
Yep.
and talking about the speed of it and
Yeah, that's what I lead with as well. And but that one, because of its place in the pantheon, like you more than with Space Gits and I don't know if this is true for Puke Apocalypse, but like I'm fishing for like a little clue about where they are in relationship to miniatures and mass battles. Like, are they ex Warhammer Fantasy Battle players? In which case, like I've got a totally different pitch to like someone who mostly plays RPGs but is like skirmish game curious, and I've got like a whole separate set of information that I want to throw at them. So I think with particularly with Hobgoblin, it's not. I don't pitch it like Gaslands. Gaslands has one pitch, and it's always that. Hobgoblin's a little bit more like, well, tell me a little bit about you, and I'll tell you why Hobgoblin is the solution to your problem.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true, and
Like dads. If I see a dad, I have like a whole dad pitch for Hobgoblin. Like
yeah,
I know what your problem is, and Hobgoblin solves it.
yes, no, well, me and Mike are dads now. We don't have enough time to play a 4 hour gaming session. Blah blah
Yeah.
blah blah
But
blah.
we still like to smash huge fantasy armies together that we spent, our teenage years painting or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think like the difference there to a degree is like the hump you have to get people over to get into the game. Like with Hobgoblin, the hump a lot of people are going to have to get over it is a sort of, how many minutes is it going to take? And
Hmm.
if I can sort of fish out that somebody's a mass battle game already, it's like, oh well, this is great, because now what I'm selling you is how much extra use you're getting out of all those minis you already own. That's
Yeah.
like a relatively easy push for Hobgoblin. But if they're a skirmish gamer, then it's a bit more like, well, no, this is great because it's fun painting minis, and you don't need to like fill out the movement trays and etc. etc. Whereas like Puke Apocalypse, it's like it's 5 minis for a war band, and part of the point is how much fun it makes building those minis. How
Mm.
it like Paul says to you, really have fun with it, enjoy it, don't worry about it. And with Gaslands, it's like there is basically no necessary hobby to this game if you don't want there to be. It's like a zero level.
Yeah, pop the car out of the packet or grab one from your child and you are ready to go.
Yeah,
So I
and I
guess
think
like at the risk of pivoting this conversation a little bit, I think one of the things that's become clear as I stand in front of the stall and I have like 8 zine-sized games and 3 or 4, bigger feeling games. I'm getting a lot of opportunity to pitch all of those different games, and people will come and they'll pick one up, and I'll have my potted pitch for it. And I think that what I'm realizing more and more is that as I develop a process for myself where I'm prototyping games and bringing them some of them to sort of market as these early access zines, trying to understand what the pitch for the game is and whether there is a strong pitch is actually a really useful piece of data in whether or not I might have a successful product that I should spend further time developing. So the clarity of the pitch for Space Gits, how easy it felt to explain what was exciting about it, not just the game mechanics, but also the world and the hobby opportunities, and the fact that like I also knew who I was pitching it to. Like, are you a 40k player who's, are you one of the genetically disposed to being orky in whatever orky faction there is in whatever system you're playing? Because there's always one. Um, that the clarity of all of that, I think, gave me just this inherent confidence that of all the games that I was experimenting with, Space Kits was obviously the strongest of the lot because I could go out with it and just be like, yeah, I know exactly how to pitch this, how to sell it. I know what the thumbnail for the Kickstarter is going to look like. I know what I'm going to say in front of people when I'm out there, in a way that like one of my favorite games to actually play that I've written is Rotwalden Realms of Carnage. It's really fun. Cannot figure out how to explain it, how to pitch it. Every time I pitch it, it comes out sounding really generic. Like it's a fantasy warband game where, your warband is led by a wizard and you don't start with everything on the field and you sort of summon it in a bit like it's kind of like Magic the Gathering, but it's not really like that. It's sort of like A Billion Suns, but it's also Realm of Chaos from the 80s. Anyway, it's brilliant. Please try it.
Hmm.
And like, if I can find the pitch for that, and maybe I will, and maybe I won't, like, I'd love to make that game into something more, but I don't need to, risk my financial stability on that because I know that if I put it out to Kickstarter in its current situation with its current
Hmm.
branding and its current fantasy and its current pitch, like it's not gonna work. It won't make me any money, and that's because the pitch isn't good enough to sell the game in
Yeah.
any on any platform.
Well, I think also like the clarity of the pitch sometimes it speaks to like the clarity of the design goals when you're like putting the game together originally. Like if when you first sit down, you've got a really sharp, clear, like one line pitch, then that's really nice to have as a touchstone all
Hmm.
through the design of the game to remind yourself that it's got to do this at various points because that
Yeah.
is the idea. That's the thing you're sort of wanting to hang off it. Like boards and black flags. The fact that the ship was moving backwards and forwards, and it was a game about pushing and sort of lanes of attack was like ended up being this very central part of the design, and all the other things from the original idea sort of dropped away as was going through, and that's going to be the thing that's going to end up being the pitch for it. It's this pirates game where the ship itself is moving and everything sliding backwards and forwards, and I know.
I think it with that game as an example, like I can't remember when you're planning to take it to Kickstarter, whether or not it's before UK Games Expo.
I mean, fingers crossed. I want to get.
Because like I mean you'll probably go to another convention or so before then, but that's an example of something where um it's a it's a game that people could latch onto a sort of generic element of, like, it's a pirate skirmish game. Great, we all know about pirate skirmish games. That seems normal. And then, like, figuring out how to pitch the rolling seas, the the moving boat thing, and whether it's the fact that people get smashed off by boxes, or whether it's the fact that the ship is moving like in a movie, or whether it's the fact that, like, the terrain is constantly shifting and your relative positions is always changing. Like, trying to figure out what it is that people are excited by. I think that's a good one where, pitching it a few times and
Mm,
watching people's sort of eyes glaze over, and you're like, get smashed off by a barrel, and they're like,
mm,
fine, cool, whatever. Like, whatever that loop is, it feels like getting out there, and this is more just generically for you at home, like getting out there and trying to pitch your game to your friends and loved ones, but even better to the general unwashed. Gives you an opportunity to just test a bunch of potential, like, is this the thing you're excited by? What about if I say this?
mm.
And that can help you sharpen up, like, what your marketing copy is going to be, or what your logline is going to be.
Yeah, and I think it can guide you uh, during the design as well, because I think like
Mm.
one of the things I
You
often
say that, but like, we only ever pitch the game to people. Like, we so rarely pitch it before we've actually made it. Like, I
I
completely agree, and I was lamenting this on a podcast interview only last week, that, like, I wish I could go all the way through, pitch it at a convention, and then come back and just be like, "Yep, no, the thing that matters is this." Like, this is why I'm so excited about a second edition of A Billion Suns, because, like, there's so many things in A Billion Suns that don't matter, and it was only when I wrote the quick start guide, like, a year later, that I realized what truly mattered. Um, so yeah, I completely agree. Like, but I
I
also
mean,
want to take this advice myself.
well, it's like if you have people like you trust and you can take sort of some bumps on an early idea, I think
Mm,
like pitching the basic like framework of the very first idea of the game you have to some people, having them play it, and
mm,
like for me, like the first sort of play test with another human being is always about like trying to figure out if you were right about what was fun about the game.
mm,
And if you were wrong and it turns out that the thing that you thought was a more minor feature was the fun thing, and the thing that you thought was really fun and exciting is a bit boring, you do have to. I have restructured and rewritten games like from that first experience. I'm sure you have. And at that point, like sometimes when you're playtesting and you have to like set up your playtest to what it is you are looking at, what it is you are looking for, what you want them to respond on, that
mm.
is sometimes a pitch, like a really early proto pitch about the game, because you're trying to say like, okay, I think this idea is fun. I want to see if this game does that thing. Let's do it. Do you also think it is fun? Friend, family member, whatever, and do you think the game is delivering it in the way that I sort of haltingly put it out there to you? So I just think like, generally that process of having like the elevator pitch, having a sort of clear vision of the game, I think it will benefit when you come to a point of when you're trying to sell it, when you're trying to publish it, whatever you're trying to do with it at that point. But
Mm.
I think it is something that is useful and handy to have there at various points in the design to sort of guide yourself back to the bits that are central to it.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, the line that will end up one day being your sort of, you know, 30-second selling point should be the line that guided the design in the first place.
mm.
It should run through it, and it should sort of ring true at various points. You don't want to like be pitching an idea that the game doesn't fulfill just because you think that will sell the game.
Yeah.
That is fairly disastrous. Right. Well, I mean, if we have pitched any of our games successfully during this conversation, then why not go down into the link section below and buy them? Because they're all available in one or another of the links down there. While you're
Or even if they're not available directly, you can back my Kickstarter immediately.
yes, obviously hopefully obviously Kickstarter Space Gits is live when this video goes out. We would love you to swing by, take a look at the pitch on the Space Gits page. come back, tell Mike that it was a brilliant pitch, and you back the game at the highest available level that hasn't yet sold out.
I opened the pitch in the Kickstarter video with, "Have you got some orcs you want to play a game?" That was my opening line. That's not what I use at the conventions now.
Mike's video for Space Gits is a whole pitching experience of its own. Swing by there, watch that video, read the pitch, back the game, come back here, tell us what you thought about the pitching of the game in the comments section. Hit the like and subscribes. Go through to our various links and buy every other game that we've made because we're very good at pitching games to you. And swing over the Discords. Come find us. We'll be somewhere around in the Rule of Carnage Discord and pitch your game at us. And see if we would buy it if it were available, and then if it is available, you can sell it to us really cunningly. That would be
And in general, I've really enjoyed the conversations in Rule of Discord where Rule of Carnage Discord where someone kind of comes in and says, "I've got an idea for a game," and someone will inevitably go, "Right, go on, what is it?" And then they'll launch into the thing, and then you get an opportunity to like sort of have a very encouraging and constructive sort of like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting, but it sounds a bit like this," or like, "Oh, it sounds like there's an interesting thing here that you're not emphasizing."
and it's also it's interesting sometimes because like a lot of people at that stage fall into one of two categories, one of which is I don't really know what the game idea is or how to express it to you other than a sort of a cloud of ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is how to know what the game is, 5 like pages of Discord posts that pop up, and it's like somewhere in between those two. You need to get to a point where you can tell me it in 2 lines, and I'll go.
Yeah, and it ain't easy. We ain't saying it's easy.
No, no,
It takes
absolutely, but it
work.
is it is worth practicing.
Yes.
Get out, practice it, see how we've done it. But for now, I think from this episode and this conversation of Rule of Carnage, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye. Bye bye.
Goodbye.